York City has been identified as a main port of entry and transit area for traffickers.
While I arrived at JFK, someone got me. At the same day, I was sold to 5 different people.
It's the perfect place to traffic someone.
I felt like I finally found that man that I dreamt about. I didn't expect that this relationship is gonna take me to the pits of hell.
In pretty much every neighborhood, there is exploitation happening.
I'm scared to be in Brooklyn, period.
People tend to hold on to, this can't be happening here, not in our Brooklyn.
And I'm hearing him pull the trigger. And I just close my eyes and I'm like, I'm gonna die.
They raped me. They abused me.
The reality, it's right under your nose. It's in Flatbush, it's in Brownsville, it's in East New York.
I was locked in that building.
He took me to the track every day after school on Southern Boulevard and made me work my ass off.
He told me, sweetheart, you cannot leave me. The only way you can leave me is by committing suicide. I own you head to toe.
Unfortunately, hip hop and rap culture, pimp or pimpin' has become something that's cool.
It's a $34 billion industry.
Yeah, demand is fueled by the sex industry that needs to be fed more bodies.
You're making a profit off these pimps putting these girls on your website.
Are you thinking about setting up a drug dealing section of the Backpage.com website?
I refuse to answer that question.
Right now, tonight, when we all go to bed, there are going to be kids out there without any options, and this is happening to them, and they're being...
Well, that's part of the trailer for In Our Backyard, where a poorly kept secret is further exposed by filmmaker Danielle Rose. She joins us today. Thanks for being here, Danielle.
Thank you.
And along with a young woman who you just saw featured in that trailer, a survivor of the sex trade, Iryna. Thank for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Danielle, this is your first documentary feature. How did you decide to tackle such a weighty subject?
So I'd always been in fine arts and writing and activism, and I figured I volunteered for an anti-trafficking event, and I was like, sex trafficking happens in Brooklyn, and I've grown up here my whole life, and my family, generations, and I think it really hit home, and it was like, you know, why does no one know that this is happening? And a few months went on, and I kept falling in love with documentary, and it kind of made sense to combine all the things that I loved into one and to educate, especially. And so I went in and I just decided to start the film, and I had just the mindset of like, people can only say no, and you know, someone starts somewhere, right, with a film. Right. And it was very organic, but you know, it was a lot in the beginning of me just behind the camera and feeling like I was just telling these stories, or I was there to tell the stories and show them. And I learned along the way. I had no idea how to use a camera. Some of the footage is even still in the film from the first day I ever shot. Wow. And yeah, and then you know, it became apparent as I made it that everyone had that same first reaction as me. Mm-hmm. You know, like it happens in Brooklyn. Like that's the, you know, every answer. You know, when I tell people what I do. So then it became kind of a mission to just change that.
Mm. So Iryna, she's mentioned people would only say no. If I ask them, you're going to only get a no, but you're one of the people, fortunately for us and anyone who sees it, who said yes. What made you decide to share your story?
I mean, basically abuse, and any kind of abuse makes you silent, you know, makes you feel unworthy, makes you feel that it's all your fault. You know, the abusers are very good at making you feel that way, you know, and even after, you know, I broke away from my abuser, I lived in that shame and fear of what people will do and say if they found out what happened to me. But one of the young ladies that was exploited by my abuser passed away at the age of 23 from illness that she contracted. So at that point, you know, I got very angry, and I said, you know what, her voice has been silenced. She cannot speak up. But I still have my voice, and the only thing that people can do, well, they can boo me, you know, they can call me names, but, you know, they can't stop me from speaking the truth and speaking on behalf of all the girls out there who's still out there and being hurt and being abused, and those who have passed away and never will have a chance to speak.
Danielle, so New York City is, as we learned there, a major point of entry for exploited slaves. Where are they coming from? What's happening? And what are officials doing, if anything?
Well, you know, the film follows Iryna, Chandra, and Ashley. And they're all very different stories, but at the same time, they're similar. You know, Iryna and Ashley both crossed over in the Oasis at different times. Other survivors we know have been sold at the Oasis. It's a motel in Canarsie on Flatlands. Chandra's brought here from Indonesia and promised a job and immediately was trafficked the day she got off the flight. So, you know, they're different stories, but they're similar. But I think, you know, in choosing Brooklyn, and it made me feel like, okay, if I could show how much is happening in Brooklyn, then you'd think about how much is happening in New York, how much is happening in the country, and how much is happening in the world. And that was why I really just honed down on Brooklyn. And official, I mean, there are great politicians in the film that are really standing up against this and trying to, you know, build to go up against this and do something. And then there's also, you know, NYPD, where you walk in and they're like, stay away from the Oasis Motel. And it's like, you know, and I ended up, I mean, there's a whole situation with going to film there and pimps throwing things in my car and things like that. And I went to the police and they said, you know, stay away.
That was their response.
Yeah. And
so that place is still there.
Yeah, it's still there.
Open, it's still active. You know, it's like a hole in the wall place. You know, you would pass by it and not notice it. But it's, you know, it's very, very much active. And all my survivor sisters, like, know it.
Yeah.
Everybody I cross paths with, they're like, yeah, we know this place, we've been there. So it's kind of by being there means that you were brought there for exploitation purposes.
So if we know it, if you were there, and the story is more dramatic, Danielle is like underselling it. Like she's literally outside with a camera, like sitting in your lap, watching all of this go on, like some twisted episode of Cops.
Yeah.
The pimps start throwing rocks and ice and all this stuff at you and your camera, like physically assaulting you. And you go to the police at 2 a.m. and they're like, that's their territory, so that's their turf. Stay away from there.
Such a statement.
But
to
it's
say
like
that's
you're
their
presenting
territory.
as you are, as this girl is like, oh, this is happening over there, and they're like, we know it's happening. Go back to Park Slope. You don't belong there. That's essentially what
I
they're
mean,
telling you.
it was, and the word territory really fired me up.
Right, because if that's their territory, what does that make a person?
You know, it was like, what are you talking about? Is the motel the territory? Are the people their territory?
And I think it's both. You know,
Yeah,
that's what
both.
the sad part. I think they're referring to be as both. Those girls are property of the pimp.
Yeah.
You know, those motels, I know they're turf. You know, that's where they do their dealing. You know, so it's kind of, you know, don't get involved.
And that to me, you know, was like a warning. You know, the ice, the rocks, whatever.
Warned on
it was
law
like that was
side and
nice.
from the
You know,
jerks.
and it was like, to me, that was like a nice way of saying, you know, get out of here, you know. But and then the police, you know, I got really mad at this policeman, and he was just so nonchalantly talking to me about it. And you know, all I'm thinking is like, I know Iryna's been there. You know, we're so close. I know all these other survivors that have been there. And then on top of it, I've just watched. I've just sat there for the little time I had and I'm like watching this happen before my eyes, and I can't do anything. I know hopefully my film can maybe do something, but in the moment it was so painful, because it was just like, you know, I remember, you know, her voice, really Iryna's voice was really kind of in my head of like, you know, I would sit there and it was, you know, so horrible. And
Iryna, did you ever
Yeah.
have any experiences with the police? Were you ever able to?
I mean, I never reported it while this was happening, and that's another thing that's very kind of a misconception, like, you know, all the girls will run to the police and tell their stories. A lot of it, you know, is just, the girls are so stripped of the human identity, you know, and you are a property, you know, and I can sit here today and say, I know what it feels like to be somebody's property. It's a horrible feeling. You know, you don't have a voice and you don't have a choice. And those girls feel that they don't have a choice. They don't have options out there in life. And I didn't report my story years later. You know, I spoke to two wonderful detectives. I reported it to the police, you know, and, you know, they have a special anti-human trafficking unit called VICE, and they have excellent people working there. And, you know, but it was just so
you
many
were
years.
able to be
Yes.
heard at that point.
At that point, I was hurt. You know,
So,
I was
Iryna,
hurt.
I wondered if there's something you know now that could have prevented what happened then. Like if you had some time machine or could send a message, what do you know now that you could have prevented you from going down that path then?
Definitely, you know, my biggest vulnerability was, you know, not having a father figure and that low self-esteem, which I believe all teenage girls suffer with. You know, if we will be honest with ourselves, and those people who have teenagers at home know that, you know, you're still not a child and you're not an adult. You know, and that's why the traffickers target young girls.
Right, because it's that prime age, right?
Yes, so
the 12,
they don't
13,
have the
14.
identity. You know, it's so easy to get them, like princess and sweetheart. You know, they're looking for that affection. They're looking for that Cinderella love story, just like I was looking for
And
that.
Iryna's story, I think, is so important in the film because, you know, again, they're all so different and similar, but Iryna really, like, you know, it could happen to anyone. And I think, you know, it could have happened to me.
Yes,
like, it's
it
like
can.
that, you don't know, like, what you would do in that situation. You go, that guy came up to her on the subway, and that's how it started. And they dated, you know, for a year and a half. And then all of a sudden it changed. And, you know, a lot of people say, you know, why didn't they just leave, you know? And that's a question that I cannot tell you how much I hate because it's like,
it's
you know, someone, you know. It's,
Well, outside of victim blaming, if there is any person sort of in your life that you're concerned with where you can recognize maybe a situation like that where there is a young person who you know, who you could sense that there might be some kind of absence there, is there something that we could do to intercede or step into their life or break a cycle before it gets to the point where that person really is able to get their claws in and take control? Like they present and act like they're the nice guy and even date for a year, but is there a warning sign that someone could look for? Or
Definitely, you know, every abuse starts with a manipulation, and it circles around power and control. It's a power and control dynamic, you know, and it's not just you know, it becomes gradual. It's a gradual process, you know, controlling, like, you know, texting constantly, where you at, checking, you know, and the girl's like, oh, he loves me a lot, and that's not the case.
yeah, where
you know?
any attention feels like good attention.
And you don't know what it, like, you know, you don't know what good attention is, so you take anything, you know, and once you feel, and at some point there's a shift. You know, you don't sit right, you don't stand right, you don't look right, your identity is being attacked at the core. You know, and words are very powerful. You know, just somebody can break your arm and somebody can say something hurtful to you, and hurtful words stay. You know, a broken arm will heal quicker than a broken human identity. So I feel like it's very important for us to love our young people in our lives, you know, pour into them, show them the support, show them the affection and attention that they deserve, because they all need that. You know, at one point, you know, I'm sitting here because people have shown me attention and affection, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that.
So I know you have information for people if sex trafficking is touching your life, or you feel like there's a situation, or if you want to get out, or there's a hotline. There's also a group started by a survivor featured in the film,
so
Mentari,
Chandra
as
has
well.
Mentari. And I think, you know, a huge thing, you know, there are all these organizations, and they're in the film, and there's hotlines, and I think there is really something to be said about see something, say something. And, you know, that's what happened with Iryna. Her neighbor said something. Her neighbor stepped in. And I think also what needs to be kind of talked about now is that there's this growth in survivors coming out and standing up and being these extremely strong, incredible women.
Right.
And they have really their own community at this point. And to me, that's like so beautiful to see. And I've really seen it change over the years, and just everyone kind of bonding together. And I think that is a resource right there. You know, you have these heroines that can help you in so many ways and like become your family.
The shame belongs to the people who are benefiting off of this and people who are turning a blind eye. So thank you. In Our Backyard.nyc, people can find out how to see the film, and we have resources online, including Polaris. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
I have to mention that Danielle started out at BRIC as an intern some years ago and worked with us for a while, and now she's off winning festivals and doing God's work. So thank you for being here, Danny.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for coming in
It's
as
a
well.
pleasure. Thank you.
She's the
Yes,
hero.
we bow down.